Okay, so what are we all about? This meetup was kind of created by someone else, and then they dropped off, and Meetup signaled, "Hey, who wants to take over?" And I took it over. So May 11th, 2015. Jesus, 9 years. So we're mostly about not, how should I say, to present safe. That's basically a lot of. I think that space is totally covered. Put it this way, especially these days, Gerald can confirm there is so much information coming from SAFE about the framework. This is more looking at the practitioner side of things. So people that are using it every day, exchange experience, troubleshoot, discuss things more like that. We want to hear from people using it rather than the people creating it. What we are not about is the basics, the safe basics, the training, safe bashing. Sometimes we do have pop-up people that do something bad. So we are not about that. So if you agree with this, you're in the right meetup. We do have a video, so just search for Scale Sydney Safe Meetup. You'll see that, or scan the code. This will be easy to find. And today we hear about, somewhat, I was kind of, how should I say, just intrigued with Allan's background. We used to work together about 6 or 7 years back in Europe for a couple of months in Nordea Bank. And pretty much what this talk is about, to embark on a journey of explosive transformation where daring strategic risk yields extraordinary rewards. So it's all to do from a bank's point of view. So that's where all the information or ideas came from. And the results were fantastic. We'll dive into these tactics that propelled their success and discovered actionable strategies that we can use, actually very, very straightforward. So I hope you're ready to embrace this, and let's figure out how we can use SAFE to execute on some of these concepts. That basically, it's a exploratory session. It's not a presentation per se. So Allan is basically founder and CEO of the Impactful organization and seasoned expert in agile methodology and business adaptability. He has over 20 years experience in the field. He's author of a book that is just about to come out. And the book encapsulates his experience in thriving dynamic business environments. So career spans from Accenture to Solution IQ, Core Agile, Fellow Mind, leading significant business transformation. And he has a deep understanding of this business transformation, providing executives and with strategic advice, mentoring, and coaching. And his leadership promotes a culture of innovation and sustained organizational agility, enhancing competitive advantage. So it's a very, very broad and deep area that he is covering. And just before we begin, a very, very quick one. Please mute if you don't talk. I think I'm already there. More time will be at the end, Q&A. And anything before we start, guys? Any questions? Or you can just jump in. So, Allan, all yours. Please feel free to pin. Start sharing and pin your screen.
I should now be taking over.
Yes, just to pin it. Allan is trying some funny modes with Zero, and he consulted some gurus that he knows of.
Yeah, I kind of had to get a technical assistance, but it works. I think if it doesn't, then please shout. And thank you for being here, and thank you for the invitation, Mikael. I love to talk about this stuff. For me, one of the most motivational things is not what we do, but the results we're able to create. And this is where impactful organizations come into play. So I'm just gonna, full disclosure, pull down my microphone because that was annoying. Right. So just a little bit about who I am and what I do. Um, we've just launched a company called Impactful Organizations. Um, and we're working to help companies actually gain impact, not to simply follow the framework mechanically, but actually make sure that it provides value at the end. And we come from different focus areas. Some are focusing on sales, some are focusing on leadership, and some are focusing on how to actually construct an organization that can deliver impact. That's a little bit about where I am coming from, and this will all be revealed. The concept for this is all revealed in the book when it comes out a little bit later this year. Um, but enough about that. Let's dive into it. So the first interesting thing is it all started with SAFE. And I'm going to talk about a bank, and full disclosure, I cannot mention the company name because then I get into competition clauses and all kinds of ugly stuff. So I will refrain from talking about the company name. That doesn't mean we can't discuss a lot about what happened. That's my only concern. But again, this was a SAFE transformation. It looked a bit traditional. It was basically following the implementation guide at its outset. So first, we started out making sure we had leadership support. That is one of the most crucial things. I still find that to be true. And we created a new operating model and designed the organization, trained everyone, prepared the launch, and then kicked off. That is pretty standard, so I'm not going to dive too far into it. If you have any particular questions, then please just interrupt. I don't think it's going to be a problem on this call if you just jump in when you have questions. And then from there, it kind of went into different directions. Some chose to be very framework focused and enforce rules all the time, and that was in the nature of what can sometimes be the misunderstood application of SAFE, where it's about following a prescription and not about making it work. So in some areas they followed the prescription, and in other areas they kind of took a more business focused path. First thing that happened was a little bit controversial, because looking at what they had been running Agile and some kind of SAFE before, but not very disciplined. And we found out that they had a backlog consisting of 3,500 features. You might ask yourself, why?
Yeah, how did they get there?
Yeah, well, over time, if you're politically driven, then you're just going to say yes, and everything is going to hit your backlog. And if you never clean it out, it becomes pretty chaotic. Just a short estimation, we found out it would take them about 30 years to complete their backlog. So the first thing we did was we killed it. That took a little bit convincing, but we managed to do it. So we got rid of the old backlog and the whole backlog hierarchy, starting from top, and basically put it to the bin. Created a new instance of the backlog tool and started over. And that turned into a marathon. We walked into the room, and the first focus was, we want to have outcome. We don't want to just have output. And that kicked off a whole series of changes to the way they had been writing backlogs as well. And basically where I got involved, started by asking the tough question: do you want to be like everyone else, or do you really want to be great? And surprisingly, not all companies decide to want to be great. A lot kind of go for the easy path, but some choose to actually go for impact. And in this case, we got a yes. It was totally amazing, which means that there were no limits of what we could address. It was not about compliance, it was about what we could actually get out of it. That also meant that the backlogs all of a sudden became about measurable outcomes rather than measurable outputs. And most backlog items out there, they work on validation criteria. So have you built this? Is the button green? Things like this you tend to go in. Here it was, have you impacted the customer satisfaction? We expect it to go up with 1.3% within 3 months from launching this feature. Whoa, it was a whole different game. It was a really big game changer. And that also meant that the strategic intention of the entire bank all of a sudden tied together with what everyone was doing. That whole backlog hierarchy, going from strategical initiatives all the way to features and ultimately at the end stories, I'll get back to that, but at least features that were all business driven and not production driven. So not about building a thing, but about achieving an outcome. And then they went through a lot of tough decisions as well. Most are good at communicating what they intend to do, but I also find that a lot of companies tend to divert when it becomes real. But in this case, they meant it. And these decisions I'll share now are basically, they enforced it. So the first thing was, we're all in the same boat and we're all on the same mission. That meant that no matter if you were a product manager, an analyst somewhere, or a developer, you're all working to achieve the same thing. And that was to satisfy the need of the customer. It was not to build a new functionality. It was to satisfy the need of the customer. That meant that there were no credits for focusing on a technical outcome if it didn't satisfy any need. Of course, there were the need to build things, but it was always intended to have an impact on the lives of, well, both current and future customers. Then they went through the next decision. And this was a little bit of a twist of how most do it, but it's important in order to get the outcome. And I'll try to explain why. When they measured throughput, like progress, one of the rules were, we're not going to count anything that's not hitting done. That means unless we have hit the criteria we have set up for something to be completed, no more work, basically. We're not going to count any effort on it. We might have done 99% of the work, but we will count it as if we didn't do anything. One of the reasons this was important for them, and for many companies it is important, is because everyone's good at parallel processing a whole lot. We have so many things in progress, but very few things actually get completed. Which means we build up inventory constantly, but we never cash in. By applying this, it meant basically that everyone went, okay, if I have 10 features to look at, it's better to have 3 that are completely done than 9 that are 99% done. That meant they got things into production and started to actually gain learning and value. The second one is we don't claim success on anything unless it has achieved real outcomes. It's not a success to build a feature and launch it. It's a success to get happy customers. It's a success to get higher revenue. It's a success to do something that benefits our business and our customers. And in some cases also benefits the employees because, well, indirectly, that also helps our customers. But doing things and having them done is not counted as a success. It counts as having things done, and that's good. But we only celebrate when we achieve outcomes. Any questions so far? You're welcome to shoot.
Oh, done doesn't necessarily mean achieve impact either, right? So we can achieve an outcome, but whether that outcome has the impact that we're after, that's a next level thing, and it's weird because you kind of got to do. If you can't get a thing done, then don't even think about impact because you got no chance. But if you can start getting stuff done, then you got to think about, is it complete enough to be an outcome, right? And if so, is this outcome significant enough or in the right direction to have an impact, right? And then have I had an impact where I want? And that's kind of, so it's several levels into it. But if you can't get it done, then it's hygiene. It's like you need to be able to get stuff done in order to do that. But whilst the stuff gets stays in progress and gets reprioritized all the time,
I would say in this context, outcome and impact are very similar, because the way they defined an outcome was to say, okay, we have happy customers. We want to be able to measure the impact it had for our customers. That's an outcome. The other one is an output. That's and I agree with you. If we can't do outputs, we're never gonna have any impact. Then we can talk about it, but the product itself is not gonna have any impacts that are lasting. We do marketing, and for a short while we can do a burst of growth, but it's not going to last. The ones that last are the ones that stick with people. So Anthony, you're completely right. There is a chain. In this case, outcomes is very, very similar to what you consider impacts, because they defined it to be. And this also meant that all of a sudden, the backlogs and the definition of them had to be very precise. It was no longer a soft intention of having acceptance criteria and intended outcomes. They had to be measurable. So we all know how to do an acceptance criteria, right? Basically verify that this thing has been done. But for success criteria, we have to do something else. We have to talk about, what do we intend to get out of it? That's one thing. That's usually the easy one. But then we also have to say, how much of an impact do we expect to get from doing it? Because otherwise we can't justify our business decision of prioritizing it. So how much, let's go for customer satisfaction. We say that's what we want out of it. How many percent improvement do we want? Do we expect it to be 1% or 20%? Thirdly, when should we be able to have achieved that? Because not everything that happens because we release it Sometimes it takes time to change people's perception and get traction. So when are we going to measure it? And fourthly, how are we going to measure it? Because otherwise, if you don't do the last one, that it can be fine in a perfect world, but you will start gamifying numbers in order to say, hey, we claim success. I found a different way of measuring, so now we have achieved it. That's not really helpful for anyone. So if I choose to measure customer loyalty by Net Promoter Score, I'm going to measure it by Net Promoter Score. I'm not going to find another way of doing it so I can kind of get my numbers. So those were the basics. And for every single feature, they added this. So for every single feature, they said, I expect this feature to impact this thing by this much, and we should be able to see those numbers at this time. And by the way, we're going to measure it this way. It of course meant that the ones working with product managers, solution managers, and so on, all of a sudden, they had to do real work. And now they were committed too. It wasn't a matter of just looking at the teams and saying, oh, have you done what you're supposed to do? And then we can say whether you were good or bad. Now they kind of forced themselves to evaluate their effort and not only whether teams were able to do the work that was planned. That spiraled into a lot of learning. It also meant that features that might have been discussed for coming in 6 months would not happen because they learned that by tweaking something else and focusing on redoing a feature, they could achieve a lot more outcome. So they would focus on that rather than just saying, now we've built up our functional stack. That was a major game changer as well. And third, no matter how well we're doing, we can always strive to improve, and we will. This is a tough one, and I would say that for a while they succeeded. I'm not going to say that it lasted forever, because it didn't. But for more, I would say a couple of years, they actually succeeded in doing this. They achieved really great results, and they kept being hungry for getting better. And it was also a matter of saying, well, you know what? We're going to invest in being better. That was a choice. It's very easy to claim that we always want to get better, but hey, am I allowed to spend time learning something? If the answer to that is no, then I'm probably not going to get better. If I'm constantly being utilized 100%, I'm not going to learn, so I'm not going to get better. So they basically said, for them, they put a cap at 60% of time should be quote unquote production time. Because 20% of our time is, well, events and ceremonies. If we calculate all this stuff off, it's roughly around 20%, which is not a big overhead compared to anything traditional. And then they deliberately reserved another 20% to act as both learning time and buffer, because then they could kind of get predictable. So when you had achieved 60%, it was actually more important to learn something new and get better than to pick the next thing from the backlog. So when they went into a PI planning, they would start by capping their capacity to 60% and plan for that. Then they might have 1 or 2 features on the maybe area, but that was it. They stopped planning. Now, other areas did differently, right? Some planned, the worst one I saw was 98%. So we're planning for 98% of our time, and they constantly failed. and they constantly compromise quality, and they constantly have to run backwards. But for this business division, it worked because they worked realistically and they worked to get better. And if you compare the ones that were fully utilized, quote unquote, like 98%, for me, that's fully utilized. It's kind of ridiculous. The 2% is like going to the bathroom. No time for surprises, nothing. We're just going to focus and hammer down. So if you compare that, the 98%, to the ones who committed 60%, on the first PI, the ones who committed 98% achieved a little bit more than the ones who committed to 60. On the second PI, the ones who committed to 60% versus the 98 outperformed the others by, I think it was like 30%. So it took one PI to outperform a higher impact or a higher planning rate, which just meant that it was like you could measure it. The result was tremendous. So one of the advices is always leave time to improve, because it's like interest rates. If you ever talk to a bank, if there's something they know, it's interest. Right? That's how they make money.
Yeah. Quick one, Allan. You're talking about investing time. How about investing funds? Example, one of the key issues we have, leave organization out of the discussion, but like pay for SPCs, pay for coaches, so to speak. Was there money for that, or and how it was treated? Was it treated as a investment or expense? Sorry, getting a bit sideways.
And I think it's like a good question. Let me start with the easy one. Was there support? Yes. But the reason why there was support was the head of the business division was commercially responsible for the entire budget. Right? So are we going to get 20% better by me investing $50,000? It's the best investment I could ever make. Right? Am I going to pay? Definitely. In real life, they made it more operational because they kind of put aside a bucket of money for improvement. But the reason why that happened was because the one in charge was measured on the outcomes, not on whether they built the right features. They were measured on everything. So the sponsor basically had a choice. Am I going to squeeze everyone and get 2% more out of it the next 3 months, but then lose 70% the following? Or am I going to make it sustainable? Basically, they had a rules that everything below, I think it was, I'm going to talk US dollars because I don't know the conversion rate to Australian dollars. In US dollars, I think everything below 250, any employee could just do. Right? No question. You didn't have to ask a manager. You just do it. Right? Of course, they asked everyone to be responsible. Because when you make actions, you're kind of accountable for the actions you make. You have autonomy. That also means you're accountable for the choices. But there were no rules to say that you had to get approval or anything else when it was below 250. So buying a book was never an issue, right? You just buy it. When it came to something more than that, it was given to the RTE. So the RTE was basically allowed to make bigger spendings than that. And then, of course, if you're going to spend $1 million, then you kind of had to go back to the sponsor and say, this is going to affect our overall budget. So maybe we need to be a little bit more diligent here. But there was a lot of autonomy on spending. It was not like they were looking at every single dime, but they were measuring the consequence. So let's take this scenario. This was a little bit the mindset. If I can grow my customer base by 20%, what is that worth? In large banks, you can probably put a B in front of that. It's not an M for millions. You could probably put billions in front of that. So are you going to spend your precious time discussing $20,000 if you can get 1.2 billion out of spending it? It's like, that discussion is very short. Like, why are you asking? Go away. And because they were looking at those, like, it was sponsored from that level of the organization, those discussions rarely happen. At the beginning, it was because, hey, we're going to give a grace period. Why did it last? Because, like, they were too busy counting the money. So kind of the cost didn't matter too much. I've tried that in another company, right? Where, like, if you ask an executive whether you could get approval on anything, like, I think it was below $250,000. If you asked an executive about that, you might want to retype your resume, because that would be a waste of time. So in high revenue businesses, you can get so much more out of spending the money than trying to not spend the money.
Cool, thank you.
But that was the mentality going in. And I see very few companies who deliberately take 20% of their entire operational budget and invest it on improvement. That is very rare. But it made a huge difference. And then how do you make that stick? Well, basically, there was a rule there that said, well, in God we trust. Everyone else bring data. You don't bring data up front, that's fine, but you're definitely going to measure what happened by doing it. And we want to be transparent. So we're not afraid of sharing something, because sometimes it goes wrong, right? Spent $20,000 on something, and then what was the outcome? Didn't work. So, but again, transparency first. That means data. Matt? You're muted.
Just a question about this 20% learning time. It all sounds very informal, what you're saying, like employees were just allowed to go off and kind of do whatever. And I'm just curious, like, why isn't this stuff worth recording in the backlog if it's learning? You know, we want make it have a clear outcome, a clear, you know, you want to go off and learn some technology, make a case for why it's important to the customer, and make sure the outcome's clear. Like, are you going to take a test afterwards, show that you learned it? Are you going to write some internal documentation, give a presentation? Is that, you know, I think there's an argument to having these sorts of things in the backlog if they're actually important.
You could. One of the things that they did was they clearly separated, and they clearly separated the responsibility of the product. So I'm going to use product manager and RT, right? They clearly separated the responsibility of the product manager and the RT. They didn't have overlap like we do in most organizations. So in most organizations, the RTE is also acting as a support function for the product manager. Let's just be honest. We'll make sure that we measure the data, that the things get delivered, that basically make sure that what the product manager said happens. In most organizations, that's the RT. Here, it was the product manager's problem. The RTE was focused on the systemic outcomes. So are we getting better? They cared about improvement rates, not about outputs. so they weren't operational. That meant that if you wanted to put it in the product feature backlog, let's call it that. Product backlog is used for a lot of things, but the feature backlog, then it would be who then prioritizes. If you make the feature backlog exclusively focus on outcomes, like business outcomes, the product manager is 100% responsible and accountable for the feature backlog. Did they also have a backlog for improvement? Yeah, but they didn't spend 20% on it deliberately, because they also wanted to have people take ownership, right? And make sure that everyone individually kind of knew what was best for them at the moment. So instead of trying to control everything, they deliberately chose to just say, hey, we're just going to create a space, fill it out. But some things definitely were controlled. They didn't need a backlog. Let's just be honest. They could talk their way through it because it was not a lot of different priorities competing and stuff. But for instance, when they had a quality problem, that was the entire theme for what we're going to focus on when we talk about improvement. And I'll get back to numbers a little bit later, but quality at the outset was a huge problem. They had so many defects and they spent a ton of time trying to deal with them. Was that explicitly a focus area within improvement? Yes. So please, when you use your autonomy, apply it to what matters. And then they measured on quality. They didn't measure on, let's say, the action. So they basically just chose to focus on what are we going for, and then measuring, did we get it? Did that make sense?
Yes,
And
thank
sorry
you.
What did they
for the
find
long
when they did that?
explanation. One more time.
What did they observe when they did that?
I couldn't hear you. Sorry, Anthony.
What did they observe when they did that?
That it worked. Because actually, by giving people, they didn't just give them the opportunity, they explicitly told them they expected them to take the opportunity. So, you know what? I'm going to give you a ton of money. And in many organizations, people would fear to take them anyway. Right? If you tell people we have $100,000 for learning, traditionally, if you've been in a traditional bank for a long time, you know it's a problem if you take it, right? There might be a pool of money, but I'm going to hold back because, oh my God, don't want to stick my neck out. Here, the executives went in and said, no. We have $100,000 and we expect you to spend it. Spend it on what matters, but we actually expect you to spend it. So it was a little bit reversed. They measured the outcomes, and the outcomes were like tremendous. And I will show you the outcomes, right? I'll just do that at the end.
Okay,
I hope that's
Allan,
okay.
just a note, another 15 left, so.
Yep. So let's move forward. And then, well, a rule they also had is we're going to have fun while we do this. We're not just going to be hammering you more and more. Everyone should be smiling and laughing when they go to work. And that was definitely not the case when we started out. Like everyone looked like a victim of an abusive relationship when we started out, like staring into the screen, dead eyes, no emotions. At the end, they were regularly on a daily basis giving each other high fives running around the office. No one basically sat in their seat for more than 20 minutes because it was all about collaborating. So the dynamic totally changed. But that came from this. It has to be fun going to work. We don't have to have a lot of fun going to work, but it has to be fun doing our work. So it's not about getting the latest football table. It's about making it fun to actually do the work. And then finally, the mission. Well, that was what I said before about leaving an impact for the customers and changing their life situation, not just like their rational offerings, because this is what drives behavior. And it drives behavior when it says lives here, it drives behavior not just for the customers, but also for the employees. Let's be honest, for all of us, if we were like in a position to make life better for someone, is that more motivational than saying we can give them something? And to be honest, when you really mean this, it's going to have a tremendous impact, but only when you really mean it. Right here. And they did. The organization, well, they also structurally did some things to look at how teams are actually designed. One of the biggest problems in many safe, quote unquote, implementations, that basically the teams are all specialized. So the concept of component teams is used to a ridiculous level. And when you look at a feature backlog, well, you know what? This feature can only be pulled by team A, and this feature can only be pulled by team C. They made it, it took a while to implement, but they went for all teams should be able to pull all features. So no matter what we put in there, whether it's regarding credit card payment or interest rate calculations or yada yada, every single team should have the knowledge to deliver on this. Of course, they wouldn't be equally fast on doing it, but they would all have the ability. And the way to get there is just to say, well, ask for help while you're learning, right? You pull from top and then you get the expert to help you out, so you learn. That was also a deliberate decision. And what I've mentioned before, all the features had clearly defined business objectives, and they really measured it. So they went out and did interviews with customers and measured the net promoter score, and all this stuff at the times when they said they would measure it. So it wasn't a matter of saying, oh, we measured once a year along with everything else. No, they actually measured on the difference some particular action made, and not just the general measurement for the entire bank. And now the results. Customer satisfaction, and this is within less than a year. I can say that for everything, then we don't have to go to details of everything. Customer satisfaction went up by 75%. And this is the conservative number. In some measurements, it went up by closer to 90. Production incidents went down by 98% because they deliberately focused to get rid of it. They wanted to learn, so that didn't happen anymore. And then productivity, because all the politics went away and they didn't have to discuss everything all the time and go into meetings in order to make a decision and so on. Productivity went up by 1,200%. This is real data. This actually happened. And one thing that even I can look in the mirror, right? I'm not a magical person. We can all ask ourselves is, how often do we get that? How often do we get numbers like this? Because very often we're happy to see 10% of something, right? But in this case, when you apply it at scale, these numbers makes cost irrelevant. You just don't care anymore. And one of the worst reports I saw from that organization was that they went to a group of executives to share which features they had released. So they reported how many login screens and account overviews and stuff like this. No one in that room cared at all. They cared about those numbers. And once they were able to report on those, It's a whole different game. Because everyone at the top executive level know what the value of that is. They know what customer satisfaction costs. You can pretty much wake them up at 2 a.m. and ask them, what does it cost to increase your outcome, like your customer satisfaction by 10%? They're going to go, 575 million. Gerald?
Yeah, Alan, how big was the implementation? How many people, how many trains and teams? And was there a distributed component involved in this?
Yeah. From, I don't want to say something wrong, so now I'm just thinking. Sorry. Overall, it was about 500 people involved starting out. Not 500 people did this. Within that, you had several trains. And it just happened that the business sponsor of this initiative had one train. So it was one art that did this, right? The others did well too, because they've actually measured 15% annual production increase for, I don't know how many years by now. So they've kept that curve, but the only ones who did this was one art. But it had a sponsor who said, I want this. Right? It was let's say it was sponsored by the value stream driver. So the one who owns the value stream for a segment of customers. Like, okay, you have a lot of money on the line here. And they got this. So it's one art.
Did that success drive more improvements or more adoption across the bank? I mean, how did one art's pretty substantial success drive further implementation or not?
I think there were some things that could have been better. Now we also get to the dirty laundry, right? A lot of these numbers were measured and communicated up to the value stream driver. But the value stream driver didn't necessarily communicate very well beyond that level. So when she left the company, so did all the knowledge. And she got headhunted, right? So she got like one of the promotions where you just go, I can't turn that down. Kind of because of this, but her sponsors in the bank, the one who owns the like, they were responsible for 50% of the bank, right? They didn't know how that worked, which meant that the next person they hired in her place kind of lost a little bit. Also, there were some political battles inside the bank, so we kind of had to cross that. It's one of the learnings I've had since then, is that these numbers have to be transparent all the way, even though it's just one art, but they have to be known by the CEO and the CFO and the COO. I can keep putting C's on this, right? They need to know this, because otherwise when someone rotates careers, it dies.
Yeah, that sounds like a bank. We definitely try to, one of the things we always talk about is, and Carter talks about this, right? Which is generating your successful wins, et cetera, and getting them out there. So show up at a company town hall and talk about what you've done. So, but good. Anyway, I don't want to delay you much more there. Thank you.
When is this ending? I just want to make sure. Are we 4 minutes away? Or are we an hour? No, half an hour.
Yeah, we're a couple of minutes away, but hey, do you have more time to stay, Alan?
I do, because I also wanted to give you some free things that everyone could start doing.
Ooh.
Are you all up for that?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. So if you are currently in a position as STE, RTE, Scrum Master, so the people who should be focusing on improvement, there are a couple of things. Introduce, and I say radical transparency because to most people it seems that way. It doesn't mean make everything transparent. It means don't hold back on transparency because you're afraid of asking the tough question. So make things visible. One of the things that people in these positions usually don't have is formal mandate. But here's one scenario I've used, right? I'm just going to use it from a team. They went through a retrospective, found out what their biggest problem was, and then they kind of didn't want to do anything about it because it was uncomfortable. Then one of the questions you're going to ask is, well, you know, if I write up a poster, and I was still in the closed room, right? So it wasn't public, it was in the closed room. When we leave here, would it be okay with you if I write a poster saying, we know what's wrong, but we choose not to do anything about it, and place it right across the hall from the CFO's office? Would that be okay with you? Yeah, okay, transparency sucks, right? Okay, and then if that doesn't get any alerts going, we can always upgrade to a neon sign on the outside of the building saying, we keep fucking up and we don't care. Right? That's transparency. Of course, be aware how far you push it. Don't break people's confidence. Don't be abusive. But don't be afraid of hitting the head on the nail and make the things transparent that drives behavior. Second, focus on patterns. Focus on what changes that the game long term, not on the instance, right? Oh, we didn't meet our planned something for this iteration or PI. Okay, that's fine. It's like, don't be too preoccupied with that, because if it's the one that stood out, stop caring, right? If it's a pattern, if you've done it 3 times in a row, oh my goodness, we're doing something wrong. That you got something wrong one time should not take the majority of your effort. Focus on the patterns, repeated patterns. And then discipline is not optional. And most people in these roles like to be nice. And that means that we kind of bend the rules. So if we have definitions, have any of you tried this? We're getting close to the PI review, right? The inspect and adapt workshop. Let me use the right titles. The inspect and adapt workshop. And these features are, well, they're done, but there's this one thing, our definition of done, that hasn't been, well, fully completed. How do you present it? Do you present it as if you have done it? Or do you present it as if, no, we haven't done it? Or do you go somewhere in gray, right? Where you kind of don't say it, but to make everyone think that it's done? Discipline is not optional means, no, if we have a definition of done, it's the law. Otherwise, don't have it. It just creates a lot of misunderstandings. So if it says that we have updated the user guide for something in the definition of done, if the user guide's not updated, it's not done. We're not going to present it. But that's 20%. So we didn't succeed, right? Be honest and be disciplined. Don't be freestyling. It's not going to help. I'm just going to run through them and then we can take discussions when time has gone on. Okay, that was for Scrum Masters. This would be, what if you're a team member? What can you do? And for team members, I mean everyone who's not in the formally defined roles in SAFe. So it also means if you're someone working on a specific discipline. First of all, don't ask managers for decisions regarding your craft. This is one of the major mistakes I keep seeing. Is it okay that we compromise well, you know what you ask for can be done, but that means we're going to compromise architectural principles. Should we do that? Don't ask that question. You're asking someone who has no idea of the consequences, right? So if you choose to compromise quality, whether you ask the question or not is on your head. Don't ask. Ask about the things that they are capable of answering in a rational way. So could you say, okay, we can choose to go live, but the consequence is going to be next PI, we're going to own 50% of the capacity to fix this issue. And you're going to allocate it as an additional budget of 1.2 million. Do you still want that prioritized feature to go out this PI? See, now it starts to make sense commercially. And I have actually had one where there was a push for a feature because the product manager had promised it to a stakeholder, right? It got pushed really, really hard. The teams went through the analysis and came up with a number, and the number was 10 million euros. That's what, $12 million? That was the downside of pushing through on what the product manager was saying. So are you going to sign a check up front for $12 million in order to get this feature out the door? Then fine. Please sign. Yeah, I don't really think that's good. Okay, so that's transparency, right? The consequence of decisions. Use that because you're accountable for the craft. That leads to the next one. Don't ever compromise quality. Just don't. You might have the extreme outlier where it's, yeah, we're going to compromise quality because we're going to make $100 million making it on this particular date rather than 2 weeks later. So the consequence, it costs us 10 million. I don't care. I got 100 million to do it, right? But other than that, don't compromise quality. And then make your task, when you break down work, make your tasks cross-functional so you collaborate on them. Don't make them an individual job. Because then you'll get into isolations inside the team. You won't collaborate, and that means you won't achieve outcomes. Also, if someone gets sick, you're going to fail because no one else can take over because they don't know what's going on. Try to design your tasks so they cross-cut the different disciplines you need. Epic owners, sponsors, leaders, and executives, don't make requirements. Now, this is a tough one. Provide transparent constraints instead. We'll say, you know what? What we're looking for is this. This is the playing field. Within that, we would like you to focus on this. The analogy from a soccer club, right? The president says, okay, we would like to be this kind of club, and we will live in this city, and we want this kind of crowd to come here. And then you have a manager and trainer who figures out how to tactically get that done, and the players decide how to actually kick the ball. Right? The worst thing you can do as an executive is to say, well, we got this sponsorship deal from Adidas. We're just going to force everyone to use Adidas shoes starting Monday. And then afterwards figuring out that none of the players can actually win any games if they wear those Adidas shoes. Like, stupid thing to do, right? Provide the guidance and the transparency, and then ask people to fill it out. Don't try to mandate it from top. Focus on results, not deliverables. You want the outcomes, you want the impact. You don't care if you got a new account statement, right? It doesn't matter to anyone. And then protect the organization from outside interference. It doesn't mean that if you screwed something up for someone that they shouldn't tell you, but protect from the political influence of others, because what you're doing is standing out. You're different. Unless you're protected from a leadership perspective, you're going to struggle, right? Because you're going to go against the normal culture. And that means everyone will start spending time in things that are not what everyone should focus on. And then, well, we'll ask them, give us a call, because this is not that easy, but it is what is necessary. And how do we provide that environment so we can actually punch through and get the results? And all of us will actually commit to outcomes. We don't mind, as long as we're in a collaboration and not, let's say, we provide the advice, you do something different, then we're accountable for the outcome. That's not going to work, right? But none of us at impactful organizations are afraid of committing. So we will gladly go in with you. We will help you get there. And I think that was about it. Any questions so far or now? That was dead silent.
I was just thinking back to, you mentioned at the start when the bank first implemented this, they had a lot of defects.
Yep.
Could you speak a bit more about why you think that was? Because the teams were new, or and you know why? How, or you know. Okay.
Yep. I can definitely tell you why. I also shared that they had 3,500 features in their backlog. Right. Sorry, I'm just coming off a cold. There was a lot of pressure until this shift to deliver and produce. And everyone was looking at numbers and numbers and numbers and numbers all the time. What's your completion percentage? You need to produce more features. That meant that they had constantly compromised the quality integrity. Another thing was they had never really defined what it meant to do quality, which also meant that different people have different opinions. And then when you put that together, it gets really mushy. So they weren't disciplined up until that point. So the first step is actually to get disciplined. Then they created some architectural guidelines on how are we going to work. So that's how they changed it. How are we going to work? What are the criteria to do good craftsmanship? And it didn't just touch upon code, right? It touched about everything that was needed to achieve an outcome. What do we professionally need to adhere to? And that was explicitly defined and referred to in the definition of done. So meaning you're not doing, like, if you've neglected that and you've done 10 features, officially in all reporting across the entire bank, you have been on vacation for 3 months. Nothing has been done, right? You've been laying on your back having a vacation. So if you're going to get credit for anything you do, you're going to comply with this. Otherwise, it's just not done. That was the harsh reality walking into. That's what I also mean by saying, don't be afraid of being strict. Because if we're not strict on the constraints, then everything's all over the place. They were very explicit. That also meant that they virtually had no production defects after it took about 1.5 PI before it really took effect. Started talking about it in the PI, then they implemented it. We're still struggling. It's getting better, but still struggling. The following one, totally different game. Like they virtually didn't release anything that was buggy. Did teams produce something that was buggy? Yeah, sure. That's why, and then they found it. Right? So a stupid discussion was, how do we mark a defect if we find it inside the sprint? Well, you know what? You don't. You don't have a defect inside the sprint. Like, just fix it. You don't need to put it in a backlog tool somewhere, right? Just if you have a problem, fix it. So a lot of the problems went away, and I think after like 2 full PIs, they were down to like, it was ridiculously low. It was to the point where no one discussed how are we going to handle all those problems. That was gone. Mikhail?
Yes, thanks.
Quick one. Conditions for this to succeed. Have you recognized something different in that organization that helped this succeed
Yes.
up front? Can you share some of those?
Yes, I actually did, but I tried to go back to it. Let me just start hiding stuff from one end to another, because then we get to it. It was actually one of this one. This was the one that made the difference. Do you want to be like everyone else, or do you want to be great? This was not a superficial question. This was real. It's like, are you willing to go down the path to win the Olympics? Or are you just going to start exercising? It's not the same experience. Here, the one who was value stream leader chose to go down the marathon path. That meant that if it wasn't really tough for anyone else to do, but for her it was. But that decision was tough, because that meant that she kind of had to stand out in her amongst her peers. So that was important, because otherwise you don't have the backing to make all the other decisions. Can you get there in a different way? Yes, you can. But in this case, that was the tipping point. That was the decision to say, you know what, we're going to go for it. In other situations, I've seen it actually happen, not quite bottom up, but close. Where it requires the product owner, at least, to start writing backlog items that can be measured based on not just function, but on outcome or impact. Once you start making that shift, your sponsors will be interested when the numbers change. So when you start applying, I really mean that advice for a Scrum Master, that makes a difference. It makes a measurable difference. And then you'll start to get attention. And that's the first step, right? When you can show that what you're doing is making a significant difference. Let's take 2 development teams. One is kind of the ordinary development team. They're going about their business and they're doing okay work and everything's fine. The other one is completely smashing through. Right? I've tried this in another organization, not this one, where one development team, their efforts could be measured at the corporate bottom line. Right? When that happens, everyone is going to go, what the hell did you do? Right? And then you will have some where it's now legal to say, oh, we're going to go for it. Because you've proven that it works. You've shown something. But most don't go in on faith alone. We need to give something more.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we have 15 minutes over, guys, but any other questions? I think Allan is keen to share because it's early in the morning as he's fresh. In Australia, we are a bit late. Any questions? Come on, go for it.
Just kind of I did have a general question. when you first go into a new organization, and about how much kind of customization you have to do. I think what's popped in my head is this concept of shuhari, from Scrum, that, to start, you should just stick to the very strict application of something. Say it's very strict application of safe. Learn the basics, get used to it, and then you can gradually tweak it. As you can learn to improvise. But at the start, when you're undisciplined, and you don't try and make a bunch of tweaks. Just try the basics first. Does that make sense? But is that not there's too much resistance? I mean, most organizations they wouldn't buy that, or do you completely disagree with me?
Oh, never completely disagree with many people. If I look at this, I would like to use a different analogy. If you went into something yourself, right? Let's say you started martial arts, not because you really want to be great at martial arts, but because it might be interesting. And the first thing you experience is a sensei who says, no, kick, no, turn your hip, no, turn your hip, no, turn your hip. You're going to probably be there 3 times and then you're never going to show up. Right? Congratulations, you failed, right? Or the mission failed. You didn't fail, but the mission failed. So I think the analogy is in some perspectives right and in some perspectives wrong. Do we need to tweak things? Yes, because it has to make sense in the business we're walking into. So can we just blindly take a book out of the shelf and say, no, we're going to practice? No, because no one's going to stick with it, right? They're going to revolt and then, yeah, congratulations. Objectively, you were right, but nothing happened. So, but if we engage with people and make it motivational to show up, then yes, of course, there are disciplined things we need to do. That's what I meant by being disciplined. Doesn't mean not tweaking. It means, can we take a standard definition of done and throw it in there? And no, their tech stack is different. They might have a legal advisor on the team, right? Okay, how does that cover anything? If I pull that down and say, oh, we're going to just throw this in, it's like, yeah, it's not making much sense, but you're telling me to be very disciplined on something that doesn't make sense. It's not going to happen, right? We have to customize. But the challenge is it's not a freestyle thing. I have spent like 20 years in this game. The last more than 10 on systemic design. So let's just to be transparent, I've designed frameworks, which means that when I tweak, it's not just a thing. It's also, what are the implications of tweaking? And then we have to go through all these cursive loops and stuff. But we do need to customize because it needs to make sense. But it doesn't mean that we can negotiate on whether we're going to follow that definition of done, right? That's where I'm saying discipline. When you've gone down the path and you've done this for 10 years, are you still going to follow that principle? Yeah, because otherwise you lost transparency and then you're screwed, right? Might I change my definition of done? Yes. Like the one team I just mentioned before from another company than this, right? Their definition of done at the end turned out to be one line. The customer is ecstatic. And they chose it deliberately, right? It was like, okay, they're not happy, they're ecstatic. Are you nuts? But for them, that encapsulated everything that needed to happen in order for this to succeed. So did we have to do proper code? Yeah, of course. Otherwise, they're not going to be ecstatic. Then we're going to screw ourselves next sprint. So no. Okay. Did they need to write down all this stuff in there anymore? No, because they didn't need training wheels. But did they adhere to that? more than anyone. Right? They tested with customers during the sprint. They did customer interviews during the sprint. They co-created with customers. Did they take that seriously? Yeah. Because when they finished that sprint, they wanted to make sure that they were ecstatic. Right? So the discipline goes for, let's say, what guides us. So when we have gates, a gate is there to be kept. Redefine what the gate means. That's fine. But when you have it, use it. Did that help, Matt?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Matt, I also pasted a link to a past meetup a couple of years back that was actually
Awesome.
called Adopt and Adapt, or maybe just Adapt. So it's kind of discusses along those lines. Maybe you can find something in there.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I'll check it out. Thanks a lot.
This is kind of the value of these meetups, guys, because it's really based on experience. It's not out of the book. It's not coming from the scaled agile, but it's actually what the people in the trenches are struggling with and getting through that. So, cool. Thanks for the question, Matt, and Ellen for the answer. But just to double check with Anthony and Andrew, any questions? Last questions from you guys? All good. So maybe we can close it off.
I'm just going to share this one, right?
Yes, please.
So, if you can help spread the word, and you're not a lot of people on the call, but you might be a lot of people actually watching the video. So please help spread the word. Like, we are a group of very senior professionals. We've done this for a long time, and we do have track records, all of us. But we're a new company. So if you can do us a big favor, then go and, let's say, sign up for a newsletter if you're interested. It's not mandatory. It's if you're interested. You can go to LinkedIn, follow us. You can also follow us on X. Not that a lot has happened there yet, but it's going to. And then don't hold back on engaging. Right. You are very welcome to reach out. We do keynotes, we do workshops, and then finally we do some consulting. But the majority is not necessarily that we're going to be with your company for a very long time, full time. Right? Our setup is that we'll come in, we'll help you get set up right and get the ball rolling. And then we will have this continuous interaction. But it's not necessarily that we live with you and do the work for you, because that would basically be a waste of your time. We'd rather teach you.
To fish rather than fish for you.
Exactly.
Many thanks, Alan. I think it was exceptional. Recording, guys, will be out soon, perhaps tomorrow morning. And once again, Alan, thank you so much for attending at very, very short notice, because, yeah, unfortunately, the previous speaker was had a bit of trouble. So thanks for hopping in, and hopefully you can share again some future meetup as well.
And thank you all for attending,
guys, for attending.
Bye.
Take care, all.
Thanks so much, Alan. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.